Welcome to Faith and Culture Now. Today we are joined by Josiah Presley. Josiah, good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I met Josiah several years ago when he became a student in one of my classes here at the college. And during that class I got to know him a little bit and was just really impressed with him as a student and impressed with the work you were doing. And you are now graduated, so you're a college grad.
Yep.
Recently engaged, so
Yes, sir.
congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
And so the other thing that is worth noting here in this particular interview is that you are also an abortion survivor.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
And so that's a big deal.
Yeah.
And in our country, abortion has been and is continuing to be a major issue in politics. It's a major issue in ethics. It's a major issue in bioethics, dealing with health care. And in our country, in 2017, there was around 881,000 legal abortions. Of those, over 90% were done in the first trimester, but over 90% of those were also taken place by people who were between the ages of 20 and 30. And most of the time, the reasons given were that they were not ready to be a parent, or didn't feel like they could afford being a parent, or the other thing was that they had either already had kids and just were like, I can't have any more kids. So typically when we think of abortion, a lot of times the argument turns to the reasons why people have abortions. And the reasons that are often given, especially in political debates and things, are issues of, say, domestic violence or other things of that nature. And it turns out that less than 10% of abortions take place because of that kind of stuff. And when it comes to teenagers having abortions, they are less than 3% of all the legalized abortions. And so it's certainly an epidemic in our country.
Sure.
881,000 is a lot. In 2016, the number reported was about 885,000. But in 2015, it was 912,000. And in 2014, 924,000. So the numbers have been declining, which is good. But the numbers are still astronomically high.
Yeah.
And so what I wanted to talk with you about today is just sort of allowing you to share your story, sort of getting some input from you on the topic, and to also just talk a little bit about what does Scripture teach us about the value of life, and what should we as Christians think about the topic of abortion. So to begin with, there are several passages in the Bible that deal with things like, you form my inward parts. There's also verses about rescuing people from death. There's great importance put in Scripture on rescuing from people from death. And as Christians, while we're often known for the things we hate, or the things that we're against, it's not really so much that we're trying to be against stuff, it's that we're for other stuff.
Yes.
And so with the issue of abortion, it's not that we hate women's rights, or that we hate equality, or that we're not for women.
Yeah.
It's really that we want to give a voice to the unborn child who literally cannot speak for itself. And so what are some of your thoughts on Scripture and the topic, and how Christians should view the topic?
Yeah, so if we look at it from a scriptural standpoint, we understand that human life in general is valuable. And it's valuable, why? Because human beings are created in the image of God. And because they're created in the image of God, they're valuable. If we think to when Noah comes off the ark, and God tells him not to commit murder. And he says, why? Because man is created in God's image. And so all throughout Scripture, we see this understanding that human life is valuable because it's created in the image of God. Then we take that to the topic of abortion, and we have to ask ourselves, is the human life inside the mother's womb, is that a person or not? Right? And from a Christian standpoint, we say yes. Right? From a biological standpoint, we say yes, that is a different being, that is its own person at conception. And we look at scriptures like Psalm 139, which talks about us being knitted together in our mother's womb. And so as believers, we automatically hold human life as valuable. And then the question becomes, well, in the womb, is it human life? And the answer, as we say as believers, is yes. The answers that biology and science give us are actually yes as well. And so that means we then should value it as human life. And then that goes into all the other scriptures that talks about being a voice for the voiceless, right? Taking care of the orphan and widow, taking care of those who cannot take care of themselves, speaking up for those who cannot speak for themselves, and everything else that we see in Scripture that calls us to love our neighbors. That then applies to the unborn too.
Sure. Yeah, and one of the subjects in Scripture is when Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself, people go, well, who is my neighbor?
Yeah.
And Jesus tells stories, and he tells stories where the person who's the neighbor is the people, or is the person that the people he's speaking to would likely despise.
Yeah.
And he gives that as sort of an extreme example to show that you don't draw these lines up on, this is my neighbor, this is not my neighbor. I don't have to care about these people. Yeah. And oftentimes when it comes to issues like this, it's not that we're just ignoring necessarily what we don't see, but because we don't see it, we don't think about it that much. And so I think when people hear the numbers that are reported, this is how many babies didn't make it this year because of this particular thing. And you could go, well, what about, when it's medically necessary? Well, that may be, but very few of the circumstances reported legally are because of medical necessity. And so you're still looking at this just astronomically high number. And I think a lot of people don't realize what it is because it's just not out there. They're just not thinking about it. But when we as Christians want to show our concern for our neighbors, we look at all these children with no voice and we go, no, somebody has to stand up for their right.
Yeah.
And as Christians, we should be the most humanitarian people of all.
Yeah.
Because we know Christ.
Yeah.
And we're created in God's image, as you said. God created us as his representatives on this planet to point people to God and also to rightfully care for everything here.
Yeah.
That includes animal life, it includes plant life, it also includes human life.
Yeah.
So,
Sure.
very good. Well, we're going to come back in a minute, and when we do, we're going to talk about your story.